Well, greetings, and welcome on this day that the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. It happened again this weekend. The camera at the church had a bit of a hiccup, so welcome back to my office again. Today's reading comes from the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. The scriptures revealing the word of God for the people of God. Praise be to God. Well, tomorrow is officially designated as a holiday, marked in many communities by various solemn observances. All across the United States, people are going to be gathered in parks and in cemeteries to commemorate what this day symbolizes, this Memorial Day. Bands will play, speeches will be given, prayers will be offered up to God. Taps will be played, and guns fired as a salute to whom our nation seeks to remember on this day. From Valley Forge to Berlin, Germany, from San Juan Hill to Heartbreak Ridge, from Iwo Jima to Saigon, Desert Storm, Iran and Iraq, the blood of American soldiers has permanently mingled with the soil of 4 continents and hundreds of islands. And Memorial Day, well, it's our feeble attempt to remember and say thank you. Thank you to those who gave their best and all they had, that we might continue to enjoy the liberties that are ours. Our present commemoration of this day, it came out of the Civil War. You see, in 1865, shortly after the close of the war, some women in Vicksburg, Mississippi, they chose May 30th as a day to place flowers on the graves of their war dead. The practice of choosing a special day to decorate the graves of the war dead soon spread to the North and the South, and it came to be called Decoration Day. Well, in 1868, a group of women in Washington, D.C. asked permission of the War Department to decorate the graves at Arlington National Cemetery and to be allowed to have a special memorial ceremony to mark that occasion. Well, after a lot of discussion, finally permission was granted, but the officials, they attached a rather, harsh provision upon it. No flowers were to be placed on the graves of Confederate soldiers who were buried in a very separate section of the cemetery. Well, the ladies reluctantly but finally agreed to it and planned their program. General James Garfield, a devout Christian who later became President of the United States, delivered the memorial speech that day. In accordance with their agreement, flowers were placed only on the graves of the Union dead and not upon the graves of the Confederate. But soon, after the crowds were gone, a strong wind arose and blew almost all the flowers onto the Confederate graves. When that became known, many people believed that it was a direct result of God's intervention. After that, the order to ignore the Confederate graves, it was never repeated. Now, it's called Memorial Day. And it's observed as a day of honor, a day to honor the fallen of our nation's wars, a time when our country pauses to remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms that we enjoy. We owe them and all those who served with them. And we owe them far more than we actually realize. You see, the key to Memorial Day, I think the key is to remember. And the author of the book of Hebrews calls us in the 12th chapter to remember that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. He writes, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." And by beginning that passage with the word therefore, he's intentionally calling us to bring our attention back to the heroes of faith who are mentioned in the previous verses. Chapter 11. Chapter 11, the great faith chapter of the Bible. If you look back at chapter 11, you'll notice some of the names that he's asking us to remember. Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Rahab. Then in verses 32 and 34, he adds, "And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered the kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned into strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign enemies." What a great variety of people, many of them just ordinary individuals of faith, but used by God in extraordinary ways to accomplish His will. You see, God makes this habit of doing the impossible through people who are not that much different from you and me. The secret of living a life that makes a difference is realizing it's not what you do for yourself, but rather what it is you allow God to do for others through you. This is how we make a difference in this world and how we make a lasting impact. A songwriter by the name of Steve Green, he puts it this way: "Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. May the fire of our devotion light their way. May the footprints that we leave lead them to believe. And the lives we live inspire them to obey. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful." Now, I believe with all my heart that we are surrounded by a greater cloud of witnesses than we'll ever know until we all stand together with our Lord and Savior in heaven. We are recipients of the faith, testimony, and sacrifices made by unnumbered multitudes who have blazed a path before us. It's like the old psalmist. We cry out, "Since my youth, O God, you have taught me. And to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, O God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your might to all who are to come." Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. Now, with all that in mind, excuse me, let's suppose that sometime during this week, You turn on your television set, turn on the news, and you heard these three announcements. These three announcements. Number one, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has just issued this statement. Divine providence, that's God, has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers. Can you imagine hearing that on the news? Or what about the second one? Inquiries by our reporters revealed that almost every state legislator has now passed a law requiring all elected officials to take this oath. I do profess faith in God the Father and in the Lord Jesus Christ, his only Son. And I do acknowledge the Holy Scriptures of Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. Can you imagine hearing that on the news? What about this last one, number 3? Legislation was passed today in Congress to affirm that the Congress of the United States approves and recommends the Holy Bible for use in the schools. What do you think the response to these announcements would be, especially in today's media? I think there'd be more reaction to it than even we could imagine. And it wouldn't be positive. But the amazing thing is this. Every one of those 3 statements is historically accurate and factual. It's true. It was John Jay, the very first Chief Justice and the father of the Supreme Court, one of the primary writers of the Constitution. It was he who declared it is the duty of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers. It was the state of Delaware, along with most of the others, which required office holders to take an oath affirming their Christian faith before they could take office. Isn't that amazing? And not only did Congress in 1782 approve the use of Bibles in our schools, they even paid for them with our tax dollars. And then in 1844, when someone sued to remove them, the Supreme Court ruled, and here's their ruling. Why should not the Bible, and especially the New Testament, be read and taught as divine revelation in the schools? Where can the purest principles of morality be learned so clearly or so perfectly as from the New Testament? Just think about it. Just think about this. If these people who were so instrumental in establishing our nation, were here to say and do these things in our country today, they wouldn't be thought of well. They'd be considered right-wing extremists and a threat to our nation. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. You see, we have gone a long ways away from the roots as Americans. Most of our school systems and colleges and universities have become so secularized, so distanced from religion, that huge chunks of information about the spiritual roots of our nation are neglected. And unless you hear it from Christians, where are you going to hear it? So here's my proposition for you today. My proposition on this eve of Memorial Day. I want to talk a little bit about the early history of our nation. That early history that most Americans just don't know. Here are some of the things that are worth knowing about the roots of our nation. About what makes America right. We hear a lot about, what makes America wrong, but here's some things that make America right. The first thing right about America is that our earliest permanent settlers were people who came here primarily looking for religious freedom Other nations, for the most part, came into existence by conquest or for selfish ambition or motives. The French, they settled in Canada looking for gold and furs. The Spanish, they settled Mexico and South America looking only to rob those countries of their gold. But it was the primary in the atmosphere of God, not gold, that America was born. The hardy souls, those hardy souls who sailed the Mayflower back in 1620, fled from tyranny and oppression. And the Mayflower Compact, you might remember hearing about that in school if you're old enough. Some of the young kids may never hear that, but some of us older ones remember that from history class. The Mayflower Compact, which they signed beneath the swinging lantern of a cabin on their ship, they proclaimed that they had come to the New World for, and I quote, the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. You see, in the early colonies, the first public building to be erected was a church house. And the first public exercise was the worship of Almighty God. When sorrow came, they gathered at the church to appeal to God for help. When bountiful harvests filled their barns, they gathered at the church for thanksgiving to God for all the bountiful harvest. In 1643, as more and more people arrived on these shores, they joined together to form the New England Confederation. And they wrote a constitution. The very first constitution written in the New World. Before the constitution that we know of today, the New England Confederation had a constitution, and it began with these words. Whereas we all came into these parts with one and the same end and aim, namely to advance the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ and to enjoy the liberties of the gospel in purity and peace. People, these are our spiritual forefathers who came to the shores of America so they could worship and they could practice their faith without fear or persecution. So the first thing that's right about America is that its earliest permanent settlers came here primarily looking for religious freedom. The second thing right about America is that the founders of our nation had a strong desire to be pleasing to God and to do His will. But before I go any further, I realize some of you are thinking, this isn't what I heard about our forefathers. But you need to realize that around 150 years passed from the time of the earliest settlers to the beginning of our nation, the 1776. And we're not very proud of some of the things that happened during those years. You see, as time passed, the original settlers, they died off, and many of their descendants were more concerned about increasing their wealth and comfort than being faithful to God and His Word. And as wave after wave of immigrants arrived here in the country, many of them came for other reasons and with entirely different motives than the earliest settlers did. What do I mean? I'll give you an example. Now, whether it was out of concern for their well-being or just to get rid of those considered undesirable, England began a program by emptying its prisons, by making it possible for prisoners to come to the New World as indentured servants. Indentured servants. That's just a polite way of saying slaves. At the same time, the King of England granted vast tracts of land in the New World to his special friends. And slavery was introduced into the colonies to work these plantations. The spiritual atmosphere, it deteriorated rapidly at that point. Churches were dying, and many of them that once sought religious freedom for themselves were now being intolerant of others. And it was during this time that some went off to some strange spiritual directions. For example, in 1692, a slave girl was brought by her master to live in Salem, Massachusetts. Salem, sound familiar? Well, she began to tell young girls there wild and vivid tales about the power of voodoo. And it wasn't long until fear filled the community and the Salem witch trials began. The end result of it was that by 1730, only about 10% of the people in the colonies attended church at all. And that which had begun for the glory of God and for the advancement of the Christian faith had all but disappeared completely from our land. By the way, much you hear derogatory about our early history, it comes from that period. Those who oppose Christianity love to point out the faults of that time. But then something amazing happened. Beginning in 1734, a handful of preachers, Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, Gilbert Tennant, John Wesley, and others, began to preach in the churches, in the streets, and in the fields. And these soon turned into great crusades and revivals that spread throughout the 13 colonies. So many people came to Christ that era in our history came to be known as the Great Awakening. Tens of thousands dedicated their lives to Jesus Christ and were baptized. So many people came to hear Whitefield as he traveled to colonies that he had to hold open air meetings because there just wasn't enough room in any of the buildings. Benjamin Franklin wrote this: "It was wonderful to see the change soon made in the manner of our inhabitants. From being thoughtless or indifferent about religion, it seemed as if all the world were growing religious, so that one could not walk through the town in an evening without hearing psalms sung in different families on every street." In fact, Benjamin Franklin, he was so impressed with Jonathan Edwards' preaching that he helped him build an auditorium to accommodate the crowds of more than 30,000 people that came to hear Edwards preach. By the way, Philadelphia at that time only had a population of 25,000. People were coming from everywhere to hear these preachers preach. They were coming by horses and buggies, and they were walking whatever it took. And it wasn't just in Philadelphia. It was throughout all the 13 colonies this was happening. Openly devout Christians were no longer just 10% of the population. They now made up 50% or more of the population. Why am I telling you this? Because this Great Awakening was the precursor to the American Revolution. Our founding fathers, the signers of the Declaration of Independence, those who wrote our Constitution and Bill of Rights, those who put their lives on the line, who fought and died that we might be free, all these grew up and came into leadership while this Great Awakening was engulfing the land. The generation that experienced the Great Awakening became the leaders of the American Revolution. Check out this prayer. I know a lot of people say Washington was not a very religious man, but check out this prayer recorded in the personal diary of George Washington. And this is in his own handwriting. "Let my heart, gracious God, be so affected with your glory and majesty that I may discharge those weighty duties which thou requirest of me. Again, I called on thee for pardon and forgiveness of sins, for the sacrifice of Jesus offered on the cross for me. Thou givest thy Son to die for me, and hast given me assurance of my salvation. That's a great prayer. And I don't care what you heard about George Washington from the modern debunkers of our history, people. He was a devout Christian. And he was not alone in his faith. Over a 10-year period, political science professors at the University of Houston collected and cataloged over 15,000, not 1,500, 15,000 writings by our founding fathers. Their goal was to determine the primary source of ideas behind the Constitution by identifying the sources quoted most often by them. Guess what the primary source was? It was the Bible. 94% of the recorded quotes of the founders of our nation were based on the Bible. The point of all this is that the cultural environment on the eve of the American Revolution was undeniably spiritual. And this focus dramatically affected the men and the women who gave birth to this nation. Now here's the third thing that I think is right with our nation. America was founded by men and women who acknowledge God's supreme rule over men and nations. They weren't perfect, far from it. They weren't all devout Christians, but each and every one of them, to a head, all acknowledged that God was supreme ruler over men and over nations. Sometimes you ought to read again the Declaration of Independence. I know most of you are familiar with the prologue that says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." They're saying, we want to form a government whose job is to protect what the Creator has given each one of us. Then after listing about 15 or 16 charges against the King of England, they make two more references towards God. Therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress assembled, now listen to this, appeal to the Supreme Judge of the world. This is in the Declaration of Independence. They're saying that God is the supreme judge of the world. And then they end their declaration with these words. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, that's God again, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Perhaps, like me, you've seen paintings of the First Continental Congress. And many of you heard stories of how they were deadlocked discussing and debating the wording of the Declaration of Independence. Did you know that finally it was suggested that they all get on their knees and they ask God what should be done? And these 55 signers of the Declaration of Independence went to their knees as one man and began to pray and seek the wisdom and the guidance of God. John Adams, in his letter to his wife Abigail, wrote this about the meeting of the First Continental Congress. He said, "Most amazing thing occurred. Even the stern old Quakers had tears gushing down their cheeks." People, wouldn't it be wonderful? Wouldn't it be wonderful today if our president, our Congress, our Supreme Court would just all together, to a head, get down on their knees like our forefathers did and ask God, what do you want for this nation? Well, at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Samuel Adams, often called the father of the American Revolution, he declared this: "We have this day restored the sovereign to the will of all men who ought be obedient. He reigns in heaven, and from the rising to the setting of the sun, let his kingdom come." So that's the third thing right with our nation. America was founded by men and women who acknowledged God's supreme rule over men and nations. Now, folks, I'm not anywhere near through all the things I could say about the founding of our nation. But I do need to bring this message to a close. So before I do, though, let me just give you a small example of some of the things that I'm skipping. First of all, I believe that America was protected directly by God from the very start. You see, the British Empire at that time possessed the most powerful fighting forces on the face of the earth. They were the superpower. And the ragtag assembly of volunteers, farmers, and tradesmen who composed the ranks of the Continental Army, they were outmanned, they were outgunned, and they were most certainly outfinanced. Only a miracle could have brought them success. And I know of at least 2, maybe 3 miracles for which there are no logical explanations. The only explanation is that God made it happen. Again, American government is patterned after and based on biblical principles. I mean, where did they get the idea for 3 branches of government? They got it right out of the Bible. That's where. And there's more. American law, as written by our founding fathers, guarantees our religious freedom. Our religious freedom to practice and proclaim our faith, regardless of what many are saying today. In accordance with that, there are some thrilling stories about how our young people, and some older ones too, how they're standing up for their rights and refusing to let anyone quench their faith and their witness for God. By the way, do you know what the tallest structure is in Washington, D.C.? It's the Washington Monument. And by law, nothing taller than the Washington Monument can be built there. And do you know what's inscribed at the pinnacle? These words from Scripture: "Let God be praised." Now, there may be legislators who don't know that. There may be presidents who don't know that. There may be Supreme Court justices who don't know that. But on the very top, the pinnacle of our nation's capital city, are these words: "Let God be praised." Oh, America, on this Memorial Day, lift up your eyes and praise God for the greatness and the blessings of this country in which we live. And may all of those who come behind us find us faithful. Amen. Amen.